At this point in the course, you're starting to lose steam. But don't give up yet. We're getting close to the end. One reason I waited to use this book to this point in this class is because, as I saw in lots of the online discussions, it's a pretty interesting book. It gives us a view into a world that many of us are unfamiliar with, and a world that's incredibly important for understanding, given the future of our own society, where inequality has been growing at kind of gangbusters since the late 1970s and early 1980s. So this is one piece as you go forward to help understand how that process happens, and maybe to think about, as some of you asked in your discussion questions, what we could do about it. Please keep those questions going. They were terrific in the discussion. I like answering those sorts of things. So as we begin this lecture, we're going to have some announcements. Then I'm going to talk about this concept of embodied capital, which Kahn talks about specifically a couple of places in the book, but is really in the background quite a bit in a lot of his arguments. And then finally, I'm actually going to talk about some of the reading for this week, so just to make sure you're hitting on the core themes. The overwhelming majority of you got the core themes and understood what was going on in the book. So you're doing well in that. There's a big chunk of reading again for this week and a quiz. And then next week, the rest of the book, a small reading in our reader that connects with ideas in next week's reading, and then a discussion to end the book. A couple more announcements that I want to make sure to give you. Again, we'll have that quiz on Thursday, so don't forget about that. If there's anything unique about the quiz, I'll let you know, but really it's on last week and this week. And of course, the big lectures were last week. Lots more about this idea of habitus. This week about this idea of embodied capital. And it won't be like just questions pulling willy-nilly details out of the Kahn reading. I'll really try and focus it on the things that we've been talking about. And then finally, I posted instructions for your final paper. My way that I approach papers for a course like this is I like to give you really kind of tight bounds to work within and specific instructions. The reason why is because sometimes people get frozen with, I don't know what a professor wants, I don't know what to do, I don't know this material well, so I've made it really easy for you. Read those instructions, do it sooner than later. So in other words, don't email me the night before the paper's due and say, Professor Adler, I have no idea what to do. I've tried to lay it out very clearly there. It's just 5 pages, double spaced, and it only requires you to do one extra piece of reading. You'll actually have to get a sociological article that is listed in the paper instructions, and you can go to the university library, either in person or you can go online to get the article, and then you need to read that article and understand it. Now that'll be difficult reading. These are difficult articles. But I think you all are ready now, particularly at the level of familiarity you're having with this, what we would call the Bourdieuian approach to understanding culture and society. Okay, so that's it for announcements. So let me go ahead and jump in. So we've seen from last week how Kahn uses this idea, Bourdieu's idea, the habitus. But we've seen that Kahn, like a good sociologist, is pointing out that hey, it's not like the social world always happens the same way it has before. So this idea that we inherit from Pierre Bourdieu about habitus, I need to see how it works in this particular instance of this elite preparatory school. And he says, I need to see how it works in the context of increasing American inequality and decreasing visibility of separation between economic classes. And that's a key point that a lot of you got right at the beginning, which is that we're in a society where there's a lot more kind of fluidity of interaction across classes. I'm not saying mobility, because actually the United States is less mobile in terms of moving up the economic ladder than it has been in generations, and is less mobile than most European countries. But what I am saying is we have a fair amount in this country of kind of cross-class interactions, as we saw in the discussion for last week. So what Kahn is trying to do is make sense of how does inequality continue to reoccur, how are elites able to navigate and reproduce inequality, and most importantly, I want to make sure you hear this, how is inequality covered over? In other words, how is it made to seem like it doesn't exist? most of you caught this idea of meritocracy that Kant worked about, which is this belief that what people have is because they worked hard to get to. Now, that's not to say that people aren't working hard, but it is a way of saying, oh, well, if you haven't got, quote, very far in life, or if you're poor, then you must not have worked hard. Of course, Kant exposes that myth, that lie, but he shows how powerful that idea is operating in the background to justify the styles of interactions and the results of inequality that he's displaying in the book. So Kant took that idea of habitus, tweaked it, put it in context, and helped us to understand this school a little bit better. So what he's doing, or I'm arguing, one of the things that he's doing kind of moving forward is he's taking another concept of Pierre Bourdieu. And remember, we talked about a couple weeks ago, Bourdieu had these three concepts of habitus, capital, and field. And he had a couple of different types of capital. Two of them that he talked quite a bit about were economic capital, where we get these class differences, and then cultural capital. And remember, that was usually about kind of knowledge, specialized knowledge that you could accrue, especially in higher education. The right taste of wine, the right clothing to wear, the right artist to like, to know the best author, those sorts of specialized elite knowledge. Well, Kant is saying, you know what, those concepts might be right for what Bourdieu was studying, but I, being Kant, have come across, I think, this kind of new way that we need to think about capital. So he introduces this concept of embodied capital. So he's not saying Bourdieu is necessarily wrong, but he's saying there's this other capital that we need to pay attention to understand inequality. And remember, in this theory of Bourdieu, capital is always a resource that can be deployed in a field of struggle to accrue more power vis-a-vis others, and to basically be able to kind of win out in the game, right? And in the field of American life, American economic life, we can call the game is the game of trying to accrue more power and resources, i.e. generate inequality. And embodied capital, according to Kant, is one way that happens, or is one resource by which to compete in that struggle. Now, there's a general point to be made about embodied capital, which is that what we do with our bodies, so what we look like, how we move, what we wear, is a way of performing distinction, right? It's almost commonsensical. You might be saying to yourself, well, duh, yeah, we perform distinction with our bodies. In other words, we signal and we show certain messages with our bodies. But there's a whole series of kind of conceptual points that come along with this concept of embodied capital. One is, and we've heard this idea a little bit before in our course, is that sometimes, or quite often, bodies are seen as reflective of internal dispositions. So this is oftentimes an implicit belief that what our bodies look like, or what we're wearing, or how we move somehow tells us about that person's quote-unquote true character. So somehow a body is supposed to be revelatory of what a person is actually about. That's kind of, I guess, a common sense way of thinking about bodies. And of course, that leads to things such as profiling or discrimination, or personal judgmentalism in relationships or context. But what we're more interested in is how that process happens, how that process by which people think bodies reflect internal dispositions, and that bodies come to attain their own kind of symbolic status. We want to understand how that happens. Let me give you an example. I have not seen this movie, but I saw the trailers and coverage about it like crazy. But you might remember the movie Black Swan from a couple of years ago about the ballerina dancer. Well, at one level, this helps us to see that the bodies that we see in the social world, and even our own, so the body in terms of what it looks like, how it moves, how we wear clothes, what we do with it, is the result of a long kind of series of formation. Now, in a Bourdieuian sense, this formation is happening in a practical way. In other words, we're not necessarily overly trained in what we do with our bodies, but we accrue experience over time through interactions with our environment that produce certain bodies. What a movie like Black Swan helps us to see is to get a body to a certain state, to look in a certain way and to do certain things, requires an immense amount of training. In this case, it's overt training, and it's training to try and get to some kind of perfect or uniform endpoint of being the best ballerina. But nonetheless, it helps us to see that there's this whole history of training and shaping that can go on. And another kind of thing that this movie reveals for us, you might remember, I think this movie won a number of Academy Awards. I should know this. I live in LA. I'm sorry. In case you can't tell, I spent a lot of time reading sociology instead of going to the movies. But anyhow, the actress who won for this movie got all sorts of oohs and ahs about the work that she had to do in order to be this ballerina, yada, yada, yada. And then it came out after the awards that actually many of the scenes of the dancing and the spinning and the expertise were actually done by a stunt double, i.e. a real ballerina. And that only proves our point even more, that to form bodies to be in certain ways takes all sorts of experience and background shaping and training. And so the bodies that we can be very overt and conscious about, but there are some very basic parts of who we are that have gotten to the point of seeming natural because of the long history that's gone into creating who we are. And on that note, we are interested in how the body works in kind of two different but related ways. One way is we're interested in how biological differences, so differences such as sex, race, shape, body shape, how they become part of social distinction and social struggle. And then we're also interested in how differences that are produced, so how should I write this? So how differences come to be naturalized. Let me tell you really quick what I mean by that last one. We're interested in how comments or observations such as that body or person is lazy, or that body is polished, or that person is hardworking. We're interested in how these judgments about particular persons, so differences, become naturalized. In other words, how explanations about those differences are about, oh, they're just that way, or that's their nature, or that's their character. We're interested in how that happens because that's just as much a process about body as this first process in which biological differences then come to be part of social struggle in ways that are not just due to the biological difference. Not that sexism or racism is a biological, natural process. It may be based on some sort of biological characteristic, but what we know about the impact and the meaning of those struggles is certainly produced by society. Let me take a quick break and we'll be right back with a lot more.